I looked my son in the eye, the boy I coached through hockey tryouts, the one I drove to university in the snow, and I told him no. My name is Gordon Ashby. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Bridges, literally. Roads, drainage systems, overpasses. You probably drove across this morning without thinking twice. I retired with a good pension, a paid-off house in Sherwood Park, and the kind of quiet life I had earned down to the last bolt and beam. I was not rich, but I was comfortable, and I had worked too hard for too long to hand any of it over to someone who had never once asked me how my knees were holding up. My wife Carolyn passed 4 years ago, ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who kept a bag of granola bars in her coat pocket for the panhandlers near Jasper Avenue, who cried at Tim Hortons commercials and wasn't ashamed of it. When she died, she took a specific kind of warmth out of the house that no amount of repainting or new furniture could replace. I kept her slippers by the back door for almost a year. I couldn't explain it, I just did. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is to me, or was, is 38. He works in sales, mid-level management for a building supply company in Calgary. He makes decent money. Not great money, but decent. He met his wife 6 years ago. I'll call her my daughter-in-law because that's what she became legally. She's an interior designer, self-employed. Her income goes up and down like the oil index. They got married in Banff. Outdoor ceremony. Beautiful day. I paid for a significant portion of that wedding because my son asked me to, and because Carolyn had already put money aside for it before she got sick. Using those funds felt like honoring her somehow. I don't regret that. What came after is another story entirely. The first sign was about 2 years into their marriage. They had bought a condo in Kensington, nice area, too expensive for their combined income if I'm being honest. But they were adults and it was their choice. My daughter-in-law's business had a slow year. They missed a mortgage payment. My son called me, not frantic, not embarrassed, just matter of fact. Like he was asking me to pass the salt. Dad, can you wire us $4,000? Just to cover February. We'll pay you back. I sent it. I didn't even pause. He was my son. That's what you do. They didn't pay it back. I never brought it up. I told myself it was a gift retroactively. I moved on. 8 months later, another call, $6,000 this time. Car repairs for my daughter-in-law's SUV and a dental bill that wasn't fully covered by her benefits plan. I sent it. Again, no repayment. Again, I said nothing. By the time my son came to me in person, drove up from Calgary without much notice, said he wanted to have dinner, just the two of us. I had quietly transferred almost $30,000 to them over about 2.5 years. No formal agreement, no paperwork, no conversation about what any of it actually was. My fault, partly. I should have said something. But I was still grieving, still adjusting to being alone, still operating on some instinct that keeping my son close meant never making things complicated between us. He took me to Joey on Jasper Avenue, ordered a steak. Let me talk about the house, about a trip I was thinking of taking to the Maritimes, about how the Oilers were playing better. He was relaxed, easy. I remember thinking it was a nice evening. I remember thinking, this is good, we're finding our footing again after everything with his mother. Then he pushed an envelope across the table. Inside was a document, multiple pages, printed and tabbed. My daughter-in-law's name at the top, a new mortgage, a detached in Tuscany, northwest Calgary. Nice neighborhood, good schools. The asking price had been $847,000. The mortgage they'd been approved for was $620. They needed the rest as a down payment supplement to avoid CMHC insurance fees and keep their monthly payments manageable. He wanted me to cover $215,000. I sat there for a moment. I picked up my water glass. I set it back down. You want me to give you $215,000, I said. It's an investment, Dad. Property in Calgary only goes up. When we sell in 10 years, it's not an investment for me, it's a gift. To you. And her. He leaned forward. He had this look on his face, patient, practiced, like he'd rehearsed it. He told me I had the money. He told me my pension, plus Carolyn's life insurance payout, plus the equity in my house meant I was sitting on over $1 million in net assets. He'd done the math. He said the phrase, "You've got more than enough." He said it like it was my obligation. Like saving and planning and living carefully for 30 years was just a storage system for his future needs. I told him no. He didn't explode. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, folded the envelope closed, and said, "I hoped you'd be different about this." I didn't know what that meant. I still don't, fully. Different than what? Different than a father who expects his adult son to carry his own financial weight. I drove home that night and I sat in Carolyn's chair in the living room. The wingback she picked out at a shop in St. Albert, Burgundy. She loved that chair, and I talked to her out loud for a while. Something I did more than I'd like to admit in those years, I said. I told him, "No, Carol, I think I was right." The chair didn't answer, but I felt steadier after. 3 weeks passed. Then I got a letter. Not an email, an actual letter delivered to my front door by a courier who had me sign for it. It was from a law firm in Calgary. 2 partners' names I didn't recognize. The letter was 4 pages long, and I read it twice before it fully registered. My son and his wife were claiming that I had made a series of verbal commitments, promises they called them, to financially support their household as part of an informal family agreement. They claimed I had acknowledged, on multiple occasions, that I intended to assist them with property acquisition. They claimed the $30,000 I had transferred over the previous years represented partial performance of this alleged commitment, and they were seeking damages for what they called my failure to fulfill the full extent of that commitment. The amount they were claiming, $340,000. I put the letter on the kitchen table and I made myself a cup of tea and I sat with it for a long time. My first instinct was disbelief. Not the cold, sharp kind, the heavy kind, the kind that sits in your chest like wet concrete. This was my son, the boy who used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from hockey, and I would carry him inside and put him to bed still in his gear because I didn't want to wake him. He was suing me. My second instinct was to call him, to say, "What is this? What are you doing?" But something stopped me. Some quiet, practical voice. Maybe it was Carolyn's, maybe it was 30 years of engineering, of checking your load calculations twice before you commit to a structure, told me to call a lawyer first. I contacted a civil litigation lawyer in Edmonton, a woman named Patricia. No, I won't use her name. She was sharp. She'd handled estate disputes, family financial cases, that sort of thing. I brought her the letter. I brought her my bank records showing every transfer I had made to my son. I brought her the email threads where he'd asked for the money and I'd confirmed the amounts. She read through everything, and then she looked at me over her reading glasses and she said, "You have nothing in writing that resembles a commitment to a down payment. These transfers are informal gifts. They have a difficult case. But they're filing," I said. "People file a lot of things," she said. "It doesn't mean they win." The legal process was slow and uncomfortable in the way that only legal processes can be. Discovery. Depositions. My daughter-in-law submitted an affidavit claiming that during a dinner in the summer 2 years prior, I had explicitly said, and she quoted me, "When the time comes to get a house, we'll make sure it happens." She said this was a binding promise. I remember that dinner. It was a backyard barbecue. I was talking about family in general, about how I wanted them to be stable and settled. I might have said something like that. The kind of thing fathers say over burgers in August, the kind of phrase that means warmth, not contract. She had taken it, evidently, and kept it like a receipt. My lawyer submitted my bank records. She submitted the email chains. She demonstrated that every transfer I had made came in response to specific individual requests from my son, each one framed as a short-term loan. Each one accepted by me as a personal decision in the moment. There was no pattern of commitment. There was no promise. There was a father who loved his son and sometimes showed it by not asking questions. What they didn't know, what my son didn't know, because I had never discussed it with him in detail, was that Carolyn had done something before she died. She had worked with our estate lawyer, a man I'd known for nearly 20 years, and she had established a discretionary family trust. Her life insurance proceeds, a significant sum, had been placed in that trust. I was named as trustee. The terms were specific. The capital could not be assigned, transferred, gifted, or directed toward a third party as a result of legal compulsion. Only I, as trustee acting in good faith under the terms of the trust, could distribute from it. My son's lawyers did not know about the trust's terms when they filed. They found out during discovery. The judge, we ended up in front of a Queen's Bench justice in Calgary, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked like he had heard approximately everything a human being could say in a courtroom. Asked me, during proceedings, one question that I have thought about many times since. He looked at me and said, "In your view, what was the nature of these transfers?" I said they were the decisions of a father who did not want his son to struggle. They were not obligations, they were not promises. They were choices I made, freely, and I do not regret making them. But a choice made freely is not a contract. The justice ruled in my favor on every substantive point. The transfers were characterized as inter vivos gifts with no documented conditions or expectations attached. The claimed verbal commitment lacked corroborating evidence sufficient to establish a legally enforceable obligation under Alberta contract law. The claim was dismissed. My daughter-in-law did not look at me when the decision was read. My son did. He had this expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger. Not quite. Something more like the look a person gets when they realize a plan they had been running for a long time has simply stopped working. Their legal costs, combined with mine which were ultimately awarded against them in part, were substantial. They did not get the house in Tuscany. I drove back to Sherwood Park that evening in late November, the sky already dark by 5, the highway out of the city quiet. The radio was off. I didn't need it. There are things no one tells you about being a parent. They tell you about the hard parts when they're young, the sleeplessness, the fevers, the endless vigilance. But they don't tell you about the particular sadness of discovering that the person you raised has a version of you in their head that is mostly just a resource. Not a person with a history and a grief and a right to his own remaining years, but a balance sheet, an asset to be managed. I don't know exactly when that happened with my son. I've looked for it. I've retraced conversations and holidays and the years after his mother died, looking for the moment the relationship it became transactional on his side while I was still treating it like it was something sacred. I haven't found a clear line. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe it was gradual, the way most damage is. What I know is this. I spent 31 years calculating loads and stresses and tolerances. I know what happens when you build something without accounting for the weight it's actually going to bear. It doesn't hold. In the spring following the ruling, I made some changes. I updated my will. I worked with my estate lawyer to formalize the trust terms in a way that was cleaner and more explicit. I added language that specifically excluded any claim arising from alleged verbal commitments made in a social context. My lawyer said it was probably redundant given the ruling. I said I wanted it there anyway. Then I booked that trip to the Maritimes I had been thinking about. I spent 2 weeks driving from Amherst to Cape Breton, staying at small inns, eating chowder, watching the tides come in at Hopewell Rocks in New Brunswick, where the water drops 40 feet twice a day like the ocean is reminding you it does not answer to anyone. I called an old friend from my university days who lives outside Fredericton. We hadn't spoken properly in years. We sat on his back porch for an evening with a bottle of scotch and I told him everything. Not the legal parts, the real parts. The dinner on Jasper Avenue, the envelope. The way my son looked at me when I said no. My friend listened, which is a rarer skill most people think, and then he said, "Gordon, you've been carrying that boy for a long time. It's okay to put it down." I have not fully put it down. I don't think you fully put down the grief of losing a child who is still alive. But I am learning slowly at 67, in a paid-off house in Sherwood Park with Carolyn's chair by the window, what it means to take care of myself the way I spent a lifetime taking care of everyone else. My pension comes in on the last business day of each month. I pay my bills, I stock my fridge, I take long walks along the river valley trails when my knees allow. Some mornings I wake up and the house is very quiet and I feel the absence of every person who used to fill it. Some mornings that's just fine. My son has not called since the ruling. I have not called him either. I leave a space for that door to open on my side, but I don't stand in front of it anymore, waiting. Carolyn would have known what to do. She always did. She'd have found a way to hold on to him without letting him take everything. She was better at that balance than I ever was. But she's gone and I am here and this is the life I have left to live. And I have decided, firmly and without apology, to live it on terms that are mine. The bridges I built are still standing. I made sure of that. Every load calculation, every stress test, every margin built in for the unexpected, I built them to last. I intend to do the same for whatever time I have left.